Job's reply to Eliphaz. Eliphaz has been talking about the classical idea that you get what you give. You reap the wind and you sow the wind and you reap the whirlwind. A good righteous person gets good stuff from God and a bad person doesn't. Well, it's not so easy to know who the righteous are. Is anybody pure? Is anybody righteous? There is a passage in the Hebrew text that St. Paul jumps on and develops a whole notion of the depravity of man. But it says, God looked down from heaven to find a righteous man, and he found none righteous, no, not one. And then, of course, it says, Noah survived the flood because he was an Ish. He walked with God. To be righteous is to walk with God. To walk with God is to be righteous. Ethics and morality are central to our relationship with God. And if we love God and not our fellow man, loving our fellow man means to respect the dignity of every human being. If we don't do that, then our love of God is a false love and a delusion. All right, I keep going on and we have to get to the day. Look, my sunburn, isn't that remarkable? A little more and I'll be totally orange like the president. Chapter 6, Job answered, could my anguish but be weighed, my misery heaped on the balances? 'Twere heavier than the sands of the sea. Therefore are my words vehement. This is why he's crying out. The patience of Job is a misnomer. He's not patient at all. He's crying out and shaking his fist. Answer me. I'm not saying take away my suffering. I'm saying explain why I'm suffering. Now we know in the received text that exists as it does now, even though it's all kinds of different pieces. I once had a large 19th century chest, beautiful piece. It's in St. Johannes Church now, because when I moved here, I didn't have room for it. But it comes in 5 pieces. And you put it together and you have a complete, beautiful wardrobe. They didn't have hangers in those days. So you open the massive door, and you have shelves, and you would put your trousers on the shelves with a press over it, a piece of wood. That's how they did it in the early 19th century. So in any case, it's 5 pieces, but now it's a whole. So Job is like that. It's 3 or 4 distinct pieces, counting the Eliphaz, these speeches at the end as separate. You have the prologue, you have the body of it, where we are now, and then you have the intervention of Elihu, and then you have the conclusion. At least 4 sections. But looking at it now as a whole, we know that why God is doing this. It was on a bet with Satan. Not a very lofty reason. And the God in the other books of the Bible would never do such a thing. They never had such a conception. We're dealing, who knows what God is? God is God. But we get the different notions from the writers. So to say, well, I'm very disappointed in the God of Job because he seems to be playing badminton back and forth with Satan, and here the little shuttlecock is us. Well, that's how the writer sees God. In the rest of the Bible, well, every book is different. You read the Gospels, you've got 4 different little novellas, and Jesus is the main character, but the Jesus that each of the authors conceives, and he's different in all 4. And you never hear that in church, but you hear it if you come to a course such as mine, which is teaching it from a scholarly point of view. I stress the differences. I find that makes it more interesting. It's a challenge to faith, but faith should be challenged all the time. Faith is a love affair with God, and no true love ever ran smooth, as Shakespeare said. No true faith ever ran smooth. The faith is not questioned. Well, that's why it isn't faith. That's why our model is Jacob wrestling with God, wrestling with the ultimate questions, fighting with it's exhausting, with all his strength. And does he come to an answer? Well, not really. All he knows, he's been wrestling with God. And now he must search for the questions, for the answer to the questions. Because when he asks the angel or God, whoever it is, what's your name? The response, as I would translate the Hebrew, is, how can you ask such a question? He told Moses, you cannot look upon my face and live. The absolute God who is God is hidden from us. And that's assumed in the wisdom literature. But Job wants to know, why are you doing? Just explain yourself. And God will appear at the end, but in a whirlwind, in a storm, in a cloud. You don't really see him. You never can. He tells Moses, you cannot look upon the face of God and live. And when Ezekiel said, I saw God on his throne, he said, I saw the form of the likeness of the appearance of the Lord. He never says, I saw the Lord. None of us can, and we daren't claim that we do. Of course, that destroys the worst thing about religion. It's exclusivism. We've got the right answer. We know what God is like and no one else does. If we realize that nobody can possibly penetrate the truth of God, we just have what we imagine God to be, then we can say our religion is true and somebody else's understanding is false. So if God is infinite and we are finite, and Judaism is finite, and Christianity is finite, because they're human creations, and all the religions, then we get closer to the infinite by pooling our finite understandings and listening to the other. And we can only grow from it. It isn't a threat. It's a fulfillment of religion, getting closer and closer to the infinite, which we never will, but a little more each day. Day by day, says the prophet, you enlighten me. Day by day, hour and hour, hour by hour. All right, so he's saying, my words are vehement in the end of verse 3. I'm crying out because I'm suffering, I'm in misery. You, friends of mine, don't seem to notice it because you're preaching ideology to me, which is always death ideology. And you don't see the human reality, which is always more complicated than any of our understandings of it. It's more complicated than Judaism says God, what God is about, and Christianity and Islam and Buddha, all of them. These are approximations. When Moses says, what is your name? God says, I shall be what I shall be, which in a way means none of your damn business. I am what I am. You just follow what I choose to reveal to your people about me, which is only a tiny fragment. So I am crying out in verses 2 and 3 because I have a right to. I'm in utter misery. Verse 4. For Shaddai's barbs pierce me. Shaddai, an ancient term for God, which means the eternal and the infinite. And those of you who have mezuzahs, you know there's that shin letter in the front, which is SH, and that stands for Shaddai, the unlimited, unlike us, who of course are limited. Shaddai's barbs pierce me. The infinite punishment is punishing me, a little finite guy. My soul sucks in their venom, these poisonous barbs. This book is full of great metaphors. It's one after another. God's terrors beset me. So that's clear enough. That's why I have a right to cry out. Now he uses an extended metaphor. Well, not so extended. See if you understand what that means. Why in the middle does he put in verse 5, does the ass bray over his grass? Does the bull bellow over his fodder? What do you think that means? It's very strange. I think, and I'm just one person, the donkey now, what is that food? Not only the misery that God has heaped on him, but what he's hearing from his friends. Verse 5, these are verse 6, rather insulting words to Eliphaz. Can flat food be eaten unsalted? Well, is a metaphor throughout the Old and New Testaments, meaning the spice of life. Unsalted food can be very, very dull. I'm supposed to be on a salt-free diet. By the way, as of today, I've lost 69 pounds and onward and downward. But without salt, I sprinkle a little on it. But the trouble is, then you retain water and you put on water weight, and it's really a struggle. Can flat food be eaten unsalted? Well, yes, but it's going to be horrible. Is there flavor in the translation here is slimy cream cheese? Well, cream cheese is not famous for its flavor. That's why you need the lox. My soul disdains to touch such. They are putrid as my flesh. Now, it seems to me and to other critics that he's talking about the words of Eliphaz. They are like slimy cream cheese. They are tasteless. They are putrid. I have no use for these formulas. And you fellows keep quoting these formulas to me, and I'm here in misery, and you don't seem to care. It's like tasteless, it's like food without taste. They are putrid as my flesh. He's covered with disease. He's in misery. Most of the nerves in the body are in the skin. That's why you cut the skin, it's very painful. If you, in an operation, he may be fiddling with your kidney or your liver or something. That's not where, if you would wake up, that's not where the pain would be. It's in the breaking of the skin. And his flesh feels it. If skin disease is horrible. He may have leprosy. I mean, that was the worst nightmare of the ancient world. But we don't know, some skin disease. Oh, that my entreaty might be granted, that God might reward my hope. And what's he asking for? He's asking not to be relieved of pain, but to have it explained. You can stand anything he seems to be saying if I know why. And that's what he doesn't understand. My hope is for an explanation. And it's not forthcoming. God is silent. That it please God to crush me, loose his hand and snip me. That would even be my comfort. If God chooses, as he apparently does, to make me suffer, that would be a comfort if I knew why. Snip me may actually mean kill me. I don't know. That's not clear. I'm sure you have another verb. I would revel in the racking pain. But I have not denied the Holy One's words. I haven't turned from God. So why is this happening to me? That's what he wants to know. 11, what strength have I to endure? What prospects to bolster my spirit? Is my strength that of stones or my flesh bronze? You know, in the book, what the heck? The movie was with Quasimodo. What's that book? The Hunchback of Notre Dame. At the end, when everybody gets what they want except the poor hunchback who has brought about all the good things, he's up in the tower of Notre Dame and he looks and Charles Lawton is playing one of his great roles. And boy, could he evoke misery. And this poor deformed man looks at the gargoyle of stone next to him and said, would that I were made of stone like thee. Would that I couldn't feel, but I'm made of flesh and blood. And that's exactly what Job is saying. What strength have I to endure? What prospects to bolster my spirit? Is my strength that of stones? Am I made of stone and not able to feel? Or is my flesh bronze? No, I'm not stone or bronze. I'm flesh and blood human being, and I'm in agony. Have I any help within me? No. The prophet says, the strength of man is not in himself. We lean on another as our fortress and our high tower. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. And the Bible assumes that man's strength is not in himself, but in God, leaning on the everlasting arms. But God has abandoned him, Have I any help within me? No. Since success has deserted me. What do you mean by success? I mean, happiness, the relationship with God, everything he's had that he's lost. And then he turns on Eliphaz. God isn't there, so he turns on Eliphaz, his friend with his formulas. A sick man should have loyalty from his friends, verse 14. Though he forsake fear of Shaddai, even if I were to give up the awe that I feel of God. My friends have betrayed me like a wadi. Now he gets into a wadi, which is a small stream metaphor. You, Eliphaz, should be comforting me. Instead, you're reading me dead formulas. I have no comfort from God or from man. My friends have betrayed me like a wadi. Now, this is a strange passage. Suppose you have this, imagine this stream. Like a wadi channels, they overflow. Like wadi channels, they overflow. My friends overflow with advice, which is worthless. You run turbid with ice. You're cold. You have no empathy. Darkened with snow. When they should flow, the wadi, meaning my friends, with help and comfort, they fade. Comes the heat, and they dry up. They vanish away. So you can't trust those little streams. They dry up. My friends are drying up. They vanish away. You're not my friend, Eliphaz. You don't really care about me. His friends fail to comfort him. Caravan, now another metaphor. He's enough with the little stream metaphor, very effective. What about a caravan? A man's life is a walk. We talk about halech, halacha. And John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist religion, talked about his Christian walk. Well, we have our Jewish walk, halacha. It's funny, we Jews find these Christian terms so alienating. The Christian walk. Where do you think he got it? From halacha, to walk the walk. That's what our concept of our life is. And to be kind and loving and to obey God's laws. And the Christians picked it up and practice it as validly as we do. They just use a different phrase. Don't be turned off by those different phrases. I had a big argument with a woman this week who's very alienated from a club she belongs to because they start with the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. The Our Father is the shortening of the Kaddish. It's a perfectly legitimate prayer for Jews to say. Now, I don't call it the Lord's Prayer because I am not allowed to call anyone Lord except what Christians would call God the Father. So when I've been the chairman of various organizations and I'm the only Jew in the place and they want to start with a prayer, I say, well, let's pray the prayer everybody knows. The Our Father, written by Jesus. It's simply an edited version, a shortened version of the Kaddish. There's nothing in that most famous of Christian prayers a Jew can't say. Just look at it. Oh, but she feels alienated. Well, you're not used to it. But look at the words. It's a perfectly kosher prayer. All right, we're so turned off by surface differences. You just go an inch under the surface and we're saying the same thing. Different words, same message. So now he's on caravans. Imagine a caravan in the desert. It changes its course and goes off in the desert and it perishes. You make a wrong turn in a caravan and the guide doesn't know where he's going. You don't get to the oasis. You go off into the desert and everybody dies. That's what's happened to my halacha, my walk with God, says Job. It's taken a strange turn, which I really don't understand. Caravans from Tema, look, the trains of Sheba yearn for the right path. And I thought my piety toward God would keep me on the right halacha, the right path. But verse 20, they are tricked that trusted. I have been tricked by God. And he has been. He's right. We know what's in the prologue. Apparently Eliphaz doesn't. He's a character in here, and how could he know that God actually arranged this on a bet? And Job is right all along. I trusted in God who tricked me. They come and they are confounded. Now it's the friends. I've been tricked by my friends too. You come here and you offer only the worst, no real advice, just formulas. You don't see me. See me. There's an ad on television about people with psoriasis. See me, not just my illness. And Job is crying out, somebody, God, man, see me. They are tricked who trusted. My friends come and are confounded. Thus you, Eliphaz, have been to me. You see a fright and are panicked. You can't deal with my agony. Have I said to you, give me something? Ransom me with your wealth of wisdom? I haven't asked you for anything, but you give me all this stupid advice. Have I asked you to rescue me from a way God has become his enemy? To redeem me from brigands? We're still on the caravan metaphor. No, I haven't asked you for anything. But as long as you're here, verse 24, teach me, and I will be quiet. Show me where I have erred. You say that I have sinned, and therefore I'm getting what I deserve. That's some friend. Show me, where have I sinned? What have I done? Now, is this righteousness or self-righteousness? Everyone has flaws. Everyone has things to repent. Those of us who pray every day, we say the Vidui every morning, a prayer about sins of commission and omission that we may have committed in the last 24 hours. And we go like this, the way we do on Yom Kippur. We feel it. It's good to hit your chest hard. It makes you feel, well, I feel sins of omission all the time. I don't go out and rob banks. I don't slap people in the face. But I do. If I say something to somebody that they find degrading, you got to be very careful. Some people are extremely sensitive. And the slightest criticism, so it's not my place to give it. Because if they burst into tears, now I comfort them and say how wonderful they are. I mean, it's awkward. You got to be, it says, wise men, be careful with your words. They are like coals of fire and they burn. That's the Talmud. Good idea. Teach me and I'll be quiet. Explain to me my suffering, where I have sinned. You just assume I have because your formula requires it. Verse 25, how pleasant are honest words, but I'm not getting them from you. But what does your arguing prove? You think to reprove me with words, but count as wind my words of despair. You're talking so much, you don't listen to me. Look at me, see me, and listen to what I have to say. I'm having a meeting next week with the head of I'm not going to get into politics, but head of an organization very much opposed to what I'm very active in. And I want to listen to him and hear what he has to say. And then I'm going to ask him questions which are crucial to me and to my group and see what's on his mind. But God give me the patience to actually let him speak and understand his point of view. I might not end up agreeing with it, but to respect each other at this time of turmoil and chaos is absolutely crucial. I don't know what will come out of that meeting. I hope something good. You would cast, now look how he count as wind my words of despair. You don't see the depth of, despair is a terrible word. It means a total absence of hope, utter misery. There's no worse word in our language. But these so-called friends don't see it. They're more in love with the argument than with their friend. Verse 27, and this is what an insult. You are so heartless. You would cast lots for an orphan. When you see an orphan, you wouldn't help him. You try to use him as a slave and you cast lots and see who could win him. Again, it's very much like what God did with Satan in the prologue. There, in a sense, they cast lots. They had a bet. And Satan won Job in a card game. What a trivialization of God in this version. Whoever put this together must have suffered, really suffered. You would cast lots for an orphan, barter over your friend. You're seeing with the other guys who are going to be speaking, the so-called comforters, who can come up with the best argument for God, protecting God at all costs, whatever happens to Job. Get God off the hook. Verse 28. Here it is. Try now to look at me, for God's sake. Look at me. Me. Not the formula. Surely I would not lie to your face. I feel I'm suffering unmerited horrors. Listen to me. Look at me. No more. Have done with injustice. Relent, for my cause is just. I cry out as Abraham did for justice. And my cause is just. And all you tell me is, well, you must have sinned, therefore this is happening. Is there inquiry on my tongue? Excuse me, is there iniquity, falsehood in my tongue? Do I lie? Do you think I'm lying? Look at me. Can my palate not discriminate words? You tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, here I am, suffering, covered in this miserable skin disease, and you don't think I'm speaking honestly? On to the next chapter. So Job continues his reply in chapter 7. Has not man hardship on earth? Are not his days like those of a hireling? Sounds Buddhist. Life is suffering. Or as in the great opera, American opera, which I may have mentioned, The Mother of Us All, about the woman who got votes for women in 1920. Oh Lord, I can't remember any names anymore. Who is that woman? Joe, who is that woman who fought for rights of women to vote?
Susan B. Anthony.
Yes, Susan B. Anthony. And it's a wonderful American opera. And the words are written by Judith Gertrude Stein. And they sound like nonsense, but they're not. And at the end, you see Susan as a statue, now honored by everybody. Before, when she was alive, vilified. And women are right to say, they didn't give us the right to vote. We took it. And she sings this beautiful final aria. Life is strife. Life is strife, life is strife, life is strife. Life is strife. Life is suffering, he says. We're born into it. Are not his days like those of a hireling? Life is a job. God treats us like servants, like a slave that grasps for the shade when he's in the blazing sun, like a hireling that longs for his wages. Not only are we servants, but he doesn't pay us. At least give us wages. And he doesn't do that. Not in my case, at least. Is there a reward for faithful service of God? In my case, apparently not. So not only does God treat us like slaves, but he doesn't even pay us. It must mean not a slave, but actually a servant, an indentured servant, whom you do pay. But he didn't get his wages, only misery. Thus, so another metaphor, the slave metaphor. Thus I am allotted empty months, empty, no hope. Weary nights are appointed to me. I can't sleep. Now, this is a terrible image. When I lie down, I say, when may I rise? You know, when I'm in my bed and I can't sleep, and if I do sleep, he sends nightmares, I said, oh, that the night might be over and I could get up. Then when I'm up and tormented, I say, oh, that the night might come and I might sleep. There is no rest, no hope. I once had a terrible back problem, sciatica. Anyone who's had it knows the agony of it. And I was fine one day, and then the next day, I couldn't lie down without agony. I couldn't sit. I couldn't stand. I lost a semester of teaching. I was in a wheelchair for a semester. And it was awful. All I could do was just lie. I was in such pain I couldn't read. And I prayed to God. I said, you've got to stop this. Give me just one position I can be in where I'm not in agonizing pain. Sitting, standing, or lying down. I don't care which one it is, but some relief. And he answered, and I was able to sit in a certain chair that belonged to my grandmother, might have been psychological. And I got some relief sitting in that chair. And at least when I tried to get up, it was terrible. And that lasted months. And then, I had injections into the spine, and it finally went away. But what agony. That's what he's feeling, physically and psychologically. Pain like that, you can't think. It's so overwhelming. Weary nights are appointed me. When I lie down, I say, oh, when might I rise? But the night drags on. I think I said this little saying, the three worst things in the world, I hope I can remember them. To lie in bed and sleep not, to wait for one who comes not, to love one who loves not. Pretty good candidates for the three worst things in the world. The night drags on, I am surfeited with tossing till dawn. He can't sleep. My flesh is clad with worms and dust. My skin cracks and oozes. It's terrible pain. And of course, if you have a skin disease and the agony is in your skin, lying down is going to make it even worse. My days go swifter than a shuttle. The shuttle that creates a blanket. In Moby Dick, you have the shuttle as an image of the days passing and freedom and determinism. Here's freedom and here's determinism as the threads come together. And then is chance, and that's life, says Melville. Great passage which he got right from here. Moby Dick, by the way, is very worth reading. Don't believe people who say it's boring. It's the great novel of America. And if you know the Bible, you know where he gets so much of it. My flesh is clad with worms and dust. My skin cracks and oozes. My days go swifter than a shuttle. They run out without hope, day after day after day after day, without hope, nothing to look forward to, no relief. What a horror. Remember, my life is mere wind. That sounds like Ecclesiastes. Wind of wind, all is wind. Vanity of vanity. Chavel chavalim, all hakol havel. Remember, my life is mere wind. Now remember, the term ruach in Hebrew can mean wind or spirit, depending on the meaning you impose on it. The religious meaning is spirit. Here he means wind, no spirit. My eye will not again see good. I have no hope that anything's ever going to change. The eye that looks will not spy me. You look at me, but you don't see me. Your eye will be on me, and I'll be gone. If you ever get around to really seeing me, I'll be dead by then. A cloud evaporates and vanishes. My life is like a cloud that evaporates and vanishes. Now he's going to talk about, what about the future life? About people who say that there's terrible suffering here, but you go on to glory. Well, this is what he thinks of that. So he that goes down to Sheol, that is this underworld cavern where our ancestors imagined, when they did develop some notion of an afterlife, it was a matter of indifference because the good and the bad went to the same underground cavern where you hang in the air and it's dust and dirt and darkness and you're sort of semi-conscious and nobody would want to go there. Sheol, just like the Greek Hades. So that he that goes down to Sheol does not come up. There is no resurrection. At this point, the Jews were developing an idea taken from the Greeks of, this conversation could go on, but let me just say quickly, and I've said it before, at first, in the earliest days, we didn't seem to have any notion of afterlife. This life, that was it. And then developed the idea of Sheol, an indifferent afterlife, which had no meaning to an ethical religion because everybody went to the same place. And we've seen that a few chapters back, description of Sheol, exactly what Enkidu in the Gilgamesh epic talked about in 2000 BCE in the Mesopotamian book of creation. The distinction between body and soul, the ghost and the machine, as Gilbert Ryle calls it, this immaterial thing which is us inside this physical shell, which is us but not really us, is Greek. And the Jews adopted it together with many Greek ideas. But they concluded, as I said, that the Greeks are wrong, that the idea is to get your soul out of your body, which is evil, because God created the body, therefore it must be good. Therefore, there must be, at the end of time, when the Messiah comes, the body and the soul will reunite. And the soul that was taking refuge in God all this time will re-enter the body will be reinvigorated and literally come out of the earth and be resurrected. That's the general resurrection. And then there'll ultimately be judgment day of embodied souls. So the Jews invented the idea of resurrection of the body. They couldn't go along with the Greeks on casting the body away forever because the Greeks assumed the body was bad. And I mean, not all the Greeks, you had the Olympics and all these athletes running around and worshiping the body, but Socrates assumed that. It was a prison house of the soul. And the Jews said, no, it's the temple of the soul, and it's just as good. The source of evil is the misuse of human free will, but that doesn't have anything to do with body or soul. That's another thing, that's the will. So at this time, the Jews were developing this idea of resurrection of the body, the Greek idea with a Jewish twist to it, and a big twist. And this, of course, in Christianity, Jesus is the first to be physically resurrected. And that's another story, but that comes right out of this Jewish idea. So, but he says, Job rejects this. He that goes down to Sheol does not come up. He's consciously rejecting, the author is rejecting the current idea about resurrection. He returns to his house no more, meaning his body, his house. A few years ago, there was a wonderful popular song. We live in a secular age, but every once in a while, they'll be on the hit parade. Well, not now, you can't tell what the heck they're singing. I mean, music has become so peculiar. But when I was a kid, at least you could understand the words. And one of the famous songs was This Old House. And this old house is falling apart, and this old house, blah, 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 and it lets into the rain. And the house is my body. And he's singing about the body falling apart, but the soul being immortal. That was what that popular song was about. And that's a Christian doctrine. And you have it in Pharisaic Judaism, but you don't have it here. He returns to his house, to his body, no more. His home never sees him again. When you're dead, you're dead. You may live in some semi-conscious state in Sheol, but who cares? Therefore, since there's only one life, and there isn't going to be redemption in the next life, I will not shut my mouth. I'm going to talk now and protest now. I will speak in anguish of spirit, complain in the bitterness of my soul. There you have that biblical parallel again. I will speak in anguish of spirit, complain in the bitterness of my soul. Spirit, soul. Same idea. Outside is ruach, inside is nefesh. Here's Ruach. Nefesh, same thing. It just depends on where it is. I will cry out in my soul and my spirit. Am I the sea or the dragon? Now that's a reference to the great Tehom, the great deep. The Spirit of God moved across the great deep. First lines of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, or when God began to create the heaven and the earth was a formless chaos with darkness over the face of the Tehom, the primeval sea of chaos, coming from the dragon of chaos in the Shepik, in the Numa Elish, where Marduk, the sun god, slays the writhing dragon of chaos. And she turns up again as the snake in the Garden of Eden. And Tehom is the Hebrew version. So with darkness over the face of Tehom, the primeval deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, or a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. What a different image. The Spirit of God moving over the face of the water. How comforting, how beautiful. But a wind from God. You imagine those dinosaur science movies where you have the dinosaur and it's windy and they're halfway in the water. I mean, what an image of horrible place you wouldn't want to be. And this is long before the dinosaurs. Just wind and chaotic water. And what does God do? He slays the dragon, Tiamat. There's several Psalms, I won't take time to read them, amazing Psalms which give God credit, and in Isaiah too. God gets credit for slaying the dragon of chaos. Now, we have several creation stories in the Bible. When people tell me they believe in the biblical creation story, rather than Darwin, which biblical creation story? There are certainly three. And one is the 6-day story, where everything's great, no sin, and God gives man and woman the command to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, have sex. And it's just great. He does everything but provide the bed. It's just wonderful. And that's the first creation. That's the first command. Peru urvu, be fruitful and multiply. And the second story, written, I'd say 400 years earlier, but that's according to a mid-19th century theory, which is being challenged. But since there's no coherent theory that the challengers have come up with, I'll just say I think it's the earlier story. And it's the Adam and Eve story, totally different. Man and woman are not created together. They're not equal. The woman is to be a helper for man. She's created out of man's rib. And a very different status for women. And she commits the sin of eating the fruit in the garden, and they discover their sexuality, which God wanted to hide from them. In the first story, he reveals it to them, be fruitful and multiply. In the second story, they discover it on their own disobedience, and God is not thrilled. Both true. If this is all a metaphor for moving from childhood to adulthood in the home, when the child discovers sexuality, the parents, on the one hand, are happy because that ultimately will give them grandchildren. On the other hand, they're very angry and jealous that now the child, especially the father, his daughter is now hanging out with Tommy across the street when I used to be the only man in her life. And so there's a great anger and feeling of rejection, as there is of joy. It's all mixed. So look at the two Bible stories. They're both true, although they tell opposite stories, because human life is complicated. On the one hand, we welcome the sexual awakening of children, and they go on, and they give us grandchildren. On the other hand, we're terribly threatened by it. That child who knows that he can be a daddy or she can be a mommy, they're not going to listen to us anymore. They're going to focus their attention elsewhere. And that's why adolescence is such a difficult period. And in any case, two creation stories, quite different. And then the third one is hidden in the Psalms and in Isaiah. These verses, was it not you, O Lord, who did slay the dragon and create the world out of its body? That's the Marduk story. Out of the broken body of Tiamat, he creates the sky and the seas and orders. Water is good when it's ordered, but not when it's chaotic. So he orders it, imposes order on it the way God imposes order on chaotic matter in the beginning. So the Jews, coming across this great old myth, they don't just say, it's pagan, must be false. They say, well, it's written down, it must be accurate in some way. So we're going to give God, our God, the Jewish God, the credit for doing what Marduk is said to do in these texts. So here you have it in the Psalms. It was God who broke the head of the dragon. And created the world out of that, the cosmic dragon of chaos. Now, that's a third creation story. So which creation story do these people believe in? They don't know because they're not familiar with the Bible. They just say by rote, I believe in the Bible's creation story. When they're 3, they have not the slightest conception. Or as I said, I don't like men marrying men and women marrying women because I believe in the Bible, one man, one woman. And I said, really? What about the patriarchs and all the different wives they had? And Solomon, the great Solomon with 1,000 wives and concubines. Wow. Didn't think of that, did you? The idea of one man and one woman actually is unusual in the book of Genesis. Perfectly okay to have several wives. Well, do you really believe in what the Bible's teaching? Well, and how do they respond? They don't think about it. Reading the Bible without thinking about it, or being told about it without reading it, or holding it up in front of a church without ever opening it, that's no way to understand the treasure in there. It's to use it as an excuse not to have an open mind. All right, there is no afterlife. Therefore, I'm going to sound off now, and I have a right to do it, and I have a right to be angry. Am I the sea or the dragon that God slew? I understand why he would slay the dragon, but why me? I'm not the dragon of chaos. I'm just a guy. That you set a guard over me? That you fence me about and torture me like this? Verse 13, if I say, my couch will comfort me, my bed will ease my complaint, then you dismay me with dreams. You give me nightmares. Terrify me with nightmares. Again, the parallel. It's very poetically beautiful, and it's a constant throughout the Bible. This repetition, they say it twice. Till my throat would choose strangling. I'd rather be strangled. My bones death, I'd rather be dead. There's no rest for me. There's no peace for me. For God's sake, leave me alone. I loathe it, meaning my life. Verse 16. I would not live forever. To suffer forever? Hold off. God, hold off. For my days are a breath. What can my life mean to you? What can a finite few years mean to an infinite being? That's a good question. Why do you rear man at all? Why did you create human beings? To pay any mind to him? Why do you pay any attention? You inspect me every morning. You test me every moment. Why? Life is a test now. He said life is a job, now life is a test. I'm constantly being tested. I feel, it's like when you go home, you want to be accepted. And if you find constant criticism from your parents and your grandparents, then your home is not a refuge anymore. He wants to go home to God and be accepted. But God won't accept him. He keeps testing him and giving him tasks that seem impossible. And then even when he tries his best to do them, he ends up suffering like this. There's no way out. When I sleep, there's no way out. When I'm awake, there's no way out. Why did you create man at all? Or pay any attention to him? Inspect him every morning, test him every moment. You never look away from me, let me alone. Leave me be while I swallow my own spit. What have I done to you, O you who watch men? man watcher. Your eye is always on me. Why have you made me your target? Good question. We know from the prologue. He doesn't know. Why am I a burden to you? Why not pardon my fault? If I've sinned, I beg you to pardon me. Pardon me. Forgive my iniquity, that I might now lie down in the dust, die. And you seek me, but I would not be. God is not my refuge, death is. Not sleep, not waking. I yearn for death, total despair. Now, this passage is a passage of despair. It takes one of the great ideas in the Bible, which is, and totally twisted. And these are these books of dissent, the negative reports. We take comfort in that God has his eye on us. Judaism and Christianity don't say there's a God somewhere. I believe in a God, but he's so far away. No, there's a God here right now who loves us and shares our life and shares his life with us. What? This is the wild surmise. There's a poem written by a man who had just read Chapman's translation of Homer. And he's saying, this opened the great Iliad and Odyssey to me. And see if I can remember it. Long have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly lands and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, that bards in homage to Apollo hold, yet never did I breathe that pure sublime, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like a watcher of the skies, or like stout Cortez when he gazed upon the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise somewhere upon a peak in Darien. I once wrote an essay, I don't know, it's published in some magazine, Religion, the Wild Surmise, that God is here with us, that the one who balances the planets in his hands cares about me, the wildest surmise of all. It's quite mad. It's like a man going up to a hill and waving his coat at the sky and saying, I matter, I matter. God sees me. And because of that, I matter. Even if everybody on earth dismisses me, God's eye is on me. Now, this is a great comfort, supposedly. Here, it's an agony. Leave me alone, he says. Your eye's on me just for suffering and testing and weighing and demanding, and go away. There's a Negro spiritual. His eye is on the sparrow. I was reminded of that by a student with whom I have interaction on the email, whom I see here. And she talked about Jesus saying, "A sparrow falls that God does not see." What a beautiful, comforting way of summing up the loving God of Judaism and Christianity. Not a sparrow falls. And Ethel Waters, the great black singer in the wonderful movie, A Member of the Wedding. If you haven't seen it, see if you can get it on Netflix or somewhere. And in one beautiful, and in this family, which is falling apart, the black nanny is the rock, as in Faulkner. The white folk are going mad, but she is the rock, and the children go to her. Now, I was raised with such a person in my life. We lived in New York, but in many ways we're a Southern family. And every Southerner, everyone I know in Charleston, well, most of them were raised by these wonderful black women who were the refuge to whom they went for comfort. I certainly was. Dorothy Sudduth, she was everything to me. Between I remember I met her when I was 5. And for 20 years, there she was. And then at the end, I was able to care for her. And when I spoke at her funeral, I tried to inadequately express what I owed to her. And that's a typical Southern experience. And she sings in this wonderful movie. She has the young child in her arms, terribly troubled. And she sings, "For his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." And you just feel, you weep. What an assurance. But this reverses it, the way this book reverses everything. The eye of God is an accusatory eye, and a death-dealing eye, and a pain-dealing eye. Leave me alone. Go away. See the movie. I think Woody Allen's greatest movie, because it's his religious movie, and that's my business, is called Crimes and Misdemeanors. A brilliant movie about the question, is the eye of God on us? As his father, in the Seder in the movie, his father says, remember Judah. Judah, he represents the whole Jewish people and the whole humanity, this character. The eye of God is always on you. And then we have a character, a rabbi who is going blind. And you see close-ups of automobiles, headlights as they go off. And the message is, God is dead. The eye of God is not on us. And so a man commits a murder. Because if the eye of God isn't on it, we can do whatever we want in those standards. And it's a terrifying movie, terrifying, with a terrible end. But you ought to see it. It leaves you with all the questions, and of course, the great questions have no answers. So here, the fact that the eye of God is on us is a torment. He prays that that would not be the case. Go away, and if necessary, let me die. Leave me alone, God. I can't take it anymore. Now, that's the end of Job's first speech, answering Eliphaz. Now, each one of these guys, Eliphaz, Bildad, and the other one, all have 3 speeches. And there's one part of the text which we're going to skip because it's so confused that the Comforter and Job's lines got all mixed up. It's so corrupted that we're just going to, it's too confusing, and we'll skip that. So you may not see 3 speeches by each one, but I'll indicate where we have to skip 1 or 2. But it's a very architectural book. Everyone gets 3 speeches. Chapter 8. Now Eliphaz has talked, Job has responded in bitterness of soul, and now Bildad, the second friend, the second comforter. Chapter 8. Bildad the Shuhite answered, "How long will you prate on so?" To prate is to talk nonsense. "Your speech is so much wind. It's unbelievable." He's listened to this man pouring out his suffering, and he's heard nothing because it challenges his doctrines, which are the dominant doctrines in the Bible. Therefore, it's just wind. Does God pervert justice? The implied answer is no. But we know from the prologue the answer is yes. It's exactly what he's done. But this guy won't admit it. I guess he didn't read the prologue. He's in the other part of the text. Does God pervert justice? Does Shaddai distort the right? Again, parallel, ask the same question twice. Does the Eternal One distort the right? You bet he does in this book. Your children said, now how callous is this man? This guy has lost 7 children, 10. Oh, of course we forget the women, they don't count. 7 sons and 3 daughters, which is a perfect number. Every number in the Bible is symbolic. Your children sinned against him. In other words, if they died, they deserve to die. What are you complaining about? What kind of a jerk would say such a thing to someone who's lost a child or children? Your children, his doctrine, his damn ideology is more important for him than the suffering of a parent who's lost 10 children. Your children sinned against God, and he paid them for their sin. I would have punched this guy in the face, but Job can't because everything's oozing. If you will but look to God, preaching, empty preaching, and implore the mercy of Shaddai. If you are pure and upright. Well, who the hell is pure and upright? And what are these people talking about? Well, relatively, I guess. If you are pure and upright, which Job claims to be pure and upright, and maybe that's the mistake of everybody here, assuming that somebody can be pure and upright. We can try to be decent human beings. But who can claim purity and uprightness? What does Shakespeare say? Then fool's opinion stings when somebody comes up to you. I remember students would come up to me and say, "Oh, professor, you know everything." What a nonsense. Well, compared to, they don't know virtually nothing. But what do you say to that? It made me feel like a fool. I said, of course I don't know everything, but I know stuff that in this class I will pass on to you, and then you'll know more. And if you don't know it, who is righteous? I found not one righteous, no, not one. Your children sinned against him, he paid them, blah, blah, blah. But look to God, if you are pure and upright, verse 6, he will bestir himself for you, he'll move himself, which apparently he isn't doing, and restore your righteous estate, your condition beforehand. How do you replace 7 children? With another 7? As if they're a set of dining room chairs? But it's the doctrine. Then your past will be as nothing. All this agony will be forgotten. And that's what happens at the end of the book. And he lives happily ever after, having forgotten this unpleasantness. How long did the unpleasantness last? Well, we don't know. Could have been a few weeks, a few months, a few days. We don't know. But afterwards, everything is restored. Your past will be as nothing. Yeah, right. And your future will prosper greatly. Freud would not agree with that. Our past is with us. Only ask. So now he says, if you don't believe me, ask the wisdom of the elders, the past generations who believed this doctrine, this if-then doctrine, this consequentialist doctrine. If you're good, you'll get good. If you're bad, you'll get bad. This simplistic idea. Ask the past generations. Consider the experience of their fathers. What about the ancestors? What would they say? Consult the wisdom of the past. Verse 9. We are ephemeral. We know nothing. Our life goes by like a breath. But all those generations of the past, they can offer you wisdom and comfort. For our days on earth are as a shadow. T.S. Eliot picks this up. Our days on earth are as a shadow, such is the fate of all who forget God. Eliot takes verse 8 and connects it to verse 13, but we'll read what's in between. Our days on earth are a shadow. Will the elders, the ancestors, not teach you and tell you and bring forth words from their minds? Now, that's the question. Get the wisdom of the elders. Now a new metaphor. And figure out what he's saying. Can papyrus grow without milk? Can rushes flourish without water? Well, papyrus need a marsh to root in. And rushes need water. So these are vegetarian plants they knew, and he can appeal to. Everybody knows papyrus needs marsh and rushes need water. The minute you cut them, verse 12, while still fresh and uncut, but they would wither quicker than grass. If you take something from its root, it will wither. You are going to wither because you have taken yourself away from God. Well, from the prologue, maybe God took himself away from him. But nobody knows that. He's accusing him of uprooting himself. Somebody said, that a Jew who is alienated from God and his community is an orphan in history. Israelites are born into the greatest heritage of all, going back to God's election of us as his agents in the world. And I believe Christianity continues that. So it's true of both our communities. To walk away from that is a terrible, fearful thing. No community, no God. Many in a certain branch of my family are like that. They simply walked away from the religion. And that means a dead end for Judaism in our family. And it's a tragedy. But it means nothing to them. They try to be good people. But those of us who are connected to the synagogue and know that's our family, the Jews are a family. And I feel the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood and sisterhood of all these people. And it's so rich. God, do I miss that? Don't you synagogue goers and church goers miss this? I mean, I would go to 3 or 4 services in the weekend. I love liturgy. And I fear for high holidays if no services are held. I mean, you can do a Passover Seder over Zoom, which I did, but high holy days, without being in the synagogue, in that packed synagogue surrounded by your Jewish family, I don't know. For me, it's a terrible loss, and I know for many of you too. So if we don't want to be uprooted, but he says Job has done that to himself and he's going to wither. That's unfair, but that's what he says. Such is the fate, verse 13, of all who forget God. Their life is like a shadow. The hope of the impious, of the irreligious will perish, because our hope is God. The hope is not in ourselves. Remember Invictus, what is that? Invictus, that poem? Out of the something that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my indomitable soul. That was FDR's favorite poem, and it got him to be president, though he was terribly crippled. He overcame it. It's his own soul he relied on. He admitted to be not a very religious man, but he, I think, did a great deal of good and was basically, I mean, you don't have to believe in God to be a good person. The trouble is, after a while, if God is no longer there, the goodness, the teaching seems to fade away with the generations. And again, according to that movie made by Woody Allen, who is an atheist but regrets being an atheist. He wants to believe, but he can't. He believes that ultimately with God goes moral conduct. Well, he ought to know, I mean, look the way he carries on. Is that a necessary connection? We all know wonderful people who don't believe in God for one reason or another, but over time, does the ethical and moral teaching, which ultimately originates in the Bible, without the source, without the root, can it be passed on? It's an open question in my mind. I don't know. Such is the fate of all who forget God. The hope of the impious will perish. His confidence is gossamer, it's nothing. His trust, a spider's house. He's trusting in a spider web, which falls away. God is the rock, the mighty fortress. And everything else, Jesus said, a man built a house, and he built it on the rock. And the wind came, and the storm blew, and that house stood. And another man built a house, and he built it upon the sand. And the wind came, and the storm blew, and that house fell, and great was the fall of it. There's only one rock. Everything else is sand. I don't ask everyone to agree with me, but that's what I believe. It's like a spider web. Verse 15, we'll finish this speech in just a few lines. He leans on his house, and it does not stand. You think it's a firm wall, and it falls. He grasps it, but it will not hold. What is the love song? I lean my back up against some wood, thinking it was a mighty something, but then it broke, bended, and then it broke. So did my own true love to me. She leaned up against this man, and he turned out to break, and her true love. That's one of the great songs, and they put different words to it. He leans on his house, and it does not stand. He grasps it, but it will not hold. Now this has been declared by the translator of the Anchor Bible here, of this book, to be impenetrable. The next verses 16 to 19. Let's see if we can make sense of it. Because this sounds good. Moist is he in the sunlight. Well, to be moist in the sunlight is good. His roots spread over his garden. Sounds lovely. Round a rock pile, his tendrils twist. This is a plant that stays moist despite the sun, and the tendrils, the roots go all over the place. A house of stone they grasp. But then, when his place swallows him, this is the shift. It disowns him and says, I never saw you. So this is the joy of his way, and from the dust another sprouts. What does this mean? I'm going to try to make sense of it. A person seems self-sufficient, moist in sunlight, and so his roots spread. He has a prosperous life. And a house of stone they grasp. Well, I don't know what that means. But this house of stone, which seems so substantial, swallows him up and disowns him and says, I never saw you. So without God, these are false assurances. And it's a difference, by the way, between the words stone and rock in Hebrew. And Sur Yisrael, the rock of Israel. Stone is something else. And that's God, of course. It says stone here, not rock. So everything seems great, but then this dwelling he builds rejects him. And he's cast out, as Job has been. But then he says, lo, this is the joy of his way. Now, the only way I can make sense of the word joy here, and you may have another word, because it's one of those impenetrable passages. It's sarcastic. This is the joy of his way. It ends in death and displacement by the next generation. And from the dust, another sprouts. He dies, godless and forsaken. But from the dust, as Adam came from the dust, another generation sprouts. That's the best sense I can make of it. It's very strange, but the image of the tendrils and all, quite beautiful, natural imagery, but it comes to nothing. 20, God will not reject the upright, nor grasp the hand of evildoers. So again, God is just. After giving this picture of a man as a plant and everything's beautiful and he's thriving, and then suddenly everything turns sour because he's godless. If you are godly, verse 20, God will not reject you. Therefore, if God's rejected you, Job, and tormented you, well, I guess you're not righteous. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter. Job, after punishing you correctly, he will then restore everything, and you will laugh again, and you'll forget all of this. And your lips with shouting. Your enemies will be clothed with shame. and the tent of the wicked will be no more. So everything, God will restore everything, and you'll live happily ever after. We'll pick it up next time in Job's reply to Bildad, chapter 9. So I will see you then. Now, Joe, if anyone has any questions, is there